Hello, excellent people. My name is Charles Beatty, and this is my mother-in-law, Michele Ramsey, and I'm going to be interviewing her today, talking about uh, the excellence that has been her life in the many years that she has been living and doing excellent things. I'm a little bit biased because she brought an excellent daughter into the world that I chose to marry, or maybe I should say who chose to marry me. And Michele has been extremely welcoming to me as far as ever since Ann and I first got serious. Michele and her husband John have really been very open and welcoming to me and made me feel, well, even before we were technically family, they made me feel like family, and there was never any doubt that there'd be a place for me in their family. So that's a really cool thing for me personally, and I appreciate that. And so I want to honor that by having Michele be one of the first people that I interview as a part of this project. So real quick, I'm going to dig into the goal of the project, or kind of the underpinnings of the project, and then I'm going to introduce Michele, and then we'll kind of get going with it. So I have done one previous interview with my friend Andrew. He and I were kind of digging into what we were trying to accomplish with the project of the interviewing people with this aim at excellence goal. And in particular, I want to say that the goal for me, the mission of aim at excellence, is going to be to promote a loud, positive voice that inspires and empowers people to live out their values out in the world. I think that there's a lot of negativity, a lot of very, very loud negativity in the news and on the internet, and social media, and everywhere else. And I don't want to be a part of it. In fact, I've kept myself at arm's length from it for a long time because I didn't want to be a part of the negativity. But I felt, I don't know if I want to say afraid, but I definitely felt uninvited to be a part of the conversation because I didn't want to be negative. And so now I've decided I'm just going to create my own platform to be positive, and that's my goal. Is this is all about taking people who I know and highlighting the positive things that they've done in their life, and the positive things that I've experienced in my life, and the ways that we've taken our own individual challenges and suffering, etc., and found ways to succeed anyway. So very specifically, the goal of the interview series is going to be all about defining excellence in the aggregate via different people's examples. So I can sit all day and talk about what I believe excellence means and show examples from my own life, but it's a very limited perspective because it's only one person's perspective. No matter how worldly I am, it's still limited. And so my goal is to introduce other people and to meet people and to talk to people and to try to use this goal of how have you encountered excellence in your life? How have you been excellent? How have people been excellent to you? And once again, really just provide an opportunity to present some positive life experience. So that's enough about the project itself. Moving on to Michele. So Michele, like I said, is my mother-in-law. She holds multiple bachelor's degrees and then a master's degree in education, all of which are from Tennessee Tech University in Cookeville, Tennessee. She has taught at college and various other tiers of education in lower and middle education for a full career and is now retired. She originally was born up in Joliet, Illinois, which is near Chicago. Her father was a police officer there. Is that correct?
Yes.
So he was a police chief in this town. And then when she was young, we'll get to the exact details of that in a minute. Her family moved down to sort of Middle West Tennessee over in Stewart County to a town called Bumpus Mills. Did a little bit of bouncing around from there, and then she came to Cookeville for school because she was recruited functionally to go to Tech rather than go to Austin P, which she knew she was going to go to school, and it was just a matter of which one. Well, Cookeville and Tech gave her better incentive to come there, so that's what started her on that journey. So enough of her background. I want to dig a little bit more because you and I were talking before I started recording about what brought you to Tennessee in the first place. So would you kind of elaborate on that? You were telling me that your father's a police chief and you guys had what sounded like a pretty good life up there, but then things changed. Can you kind of pick up from there?
Well, my father and my mother, we would go on vacation in Kentucky and Arkansas and Tennessee. and Michigan, which is all surrounding Illinois, obviously. But they loved to travel, and we had a boat, and we'd always go to the lake, and we'd fish and swim and whatever. But my father had severe health problems. He had heart trouble, and eventually ended up dying from a heart attack. But anyway, he had to retire from being a police officer, and so Tennessee was one of the places I loved to come to. And so they started looking. They'd go to big boat shows at the McCormick Center and in Chicago every year. I remember going to those, and they started looking for property, and they found a new lake was being built, Lake Barkley, and it was being flooded on the Cumberland River in Tennessee. And so they started looking for property on the Lake Barkley, which was not impounded yet, but that's where they wanted to settle. And so that's how they ended up in Tennessee.
So you mentioned that your father was a police chief.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit more about your experience of your father, the police chief, before he died?
Well, it was a small little town. It was probably about 1,000 people, and so it was a very.
And you said this is Joliet, Illinois?
No, this was at Richton Park.
Okay.
Okay. Before that, he worked for the Illinois Bureau of Investigation, and they hunted for stills, things like that at the time. And this is in the 50s, and then eventually he got into being a police officer, and then worked his way up to chief. But it was just a small farming community, a small school. Everybody walked to school, walked home for lunch, walked back to school after lunch, and so it was a close-knit community. And the police force was, united and small, and everybody knew everybody. In other words, so it was not like a big city like Chicago. It was a small farming community.
Do you remember anyone interacting with you specifically around the knowledge that your father was the chief of the police of the town? Did everybody treat you in a particular way? Like as a child, were you aware at all that your dad was the police chief, and was that a big deal? Was that irrelevant?
No, it was a big, not a big deal, but we had two phones in the house.
It was a deal.
One phone you didn't touch. It was hung up high in the wall, so we couldn't reach it. So we had the police phone in our house, and my mother was a dispatcher sometimes. And like I said, it was a little town. And so, if there was an emergency or something, my dad would have to go out for that, so all hours of the night or whatever. So, we knew that he was important, not just him, but the police were important, and people needed them, and they had to be available. So we only traveled like 2 weeks out of the year. The rest of the time, we were always in this community.
Kind of always on call, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you say you had two phones. I mean, I'm sort of reflecting on my own childhood now, and the rotary style phones.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about? Is like a rotary phone?
Yeah, one for the police line and one for our regular house phone.
So date yourself a little bit if you don't mind. Was it the kind that you pick up and you have an earpiece and a talking piece and they're separate?
Not quite. I wasn't the Waltons, okay? No, it was just a rotary dial. But you had, like, our number, I remember our number was Pilgrim 81229. So you have letters and numbers that you had to memorize as you were a kid. So if you got stolen or something, you could tell the police where you lived, But
you're saying that your personal phone number was Pilgrim 8?
1229. I don't know what P and I stand for. I'd have to look on the dial, but
okay.
But anyway, that's how we remembered it. It's like each, and you still. My mother was actually before in their early marriage. She was a telephone operator, and so she was the one that pulled the plugs in and out and connected the calls. So you had to.
So how wild is it? Just I hope I got to interrupt for just a moment.
Okay.
You're talking about telephones, right? And we're filming this on a telephone right now. I mean, it's far more than a telephone,
Oh,
and that's the thing. But like, you're describing a time when your mother was an active operator who literally connected a plug from one line to the other line in order for people to make a phone call.
So you had to have a very excellent memory, and she did. So
okay.
To be able to do that, remember, where to go, what goes where. So.
Well, how does your memory stack up against your mother's memory, you think? Do you also have an excellent memory?
I did when I was younger, but not as I get older, I don't. Yeah, I had a really good memory when I was young, but it's been fading with age.
Well, so how old were you when you left Illinois?
I was 11.
Okay. So.
And we left right after John Kennedy was assassinated. That was in November of 63, and we moved in February of 64 because my parents were in the process of selling our house, so I guess that's why, we had moved into a big farmhouse that somebody owned, while they were selling our house, and then I guess when it sold is when we came to Tennessee. But we also had property besides our house, and so we had a trailer that we camped at. For the wintertime, we'd go ice skating on the Kankakee River, and we would go swimming and boating and stuff like that in the summertime. So when we moved to Tennessee, they had property, and we brought the trailer with us, so we could live in that trailer.
Got you.
Yeah. So
Okay.
so we had a place. They wanted property is what they wanted, because what my dad really wanted to do was build like a small resort with little cabins that people could come down to and fish and just rent out. Not a big fancy motel or anything, but just little cabins that people could come to in the country on the lake and fish and
Okay.
boat and stuff.
So you're saying that this first property that they bought he was actually kind of making a long-term speculative bid, where he wanted to buy this property, live on this property, but then develop the property into a resort of sorts,
Yes,
even a small
yes.
one. And then you told me before we started filming that then this property ended up, the government
Made it
forced
into a park,
forced you
yeah.
guys to sell it and made it into a park on the lakeside, correct?
Yes,
So the government stole your idea.
yes, yes.
So
Yeah.
let that be a lesson to you.
Yeah.
When you have good ideas, watch out.
Yeah, it was on one of the bigger creeks. It was Saline Creek, which is a big tributary on the Cumberland River. So the bays or whatever on the lake were going to be really wide there.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really a nice scenic area after the lake was flooded. So that, I guess that's why they wanted it, because it was a good access area to launch your boat, and it wasn't a narrow.
And
place on the lake.
this is at one of the TVA lakes, correct?
No, this one is actually run by the Corps of Engineers, because it's on the Cumberland River.
Oh, which is
So,
navigable.
yeah, like Cordell Hull is a Cumberland River
Gotcha.
lake, and no, it's not a TVA. It was civil engineer. Cumberland. What did I say?
Oh, so that's interesting. I guess this is where we're coming against my edge, and maybe you can. So, do you know more about that? You're saying the Cumberland River specifically is not TVA
No, it's
controlled?
Corps of Engineers.
And why?
And
Is it because of the navigability, or is it because of something else?
probably both, but also the one difference is that on the TVA lakes you can own all the way down to the shore, but on the Corps of Engineer lakes you have an easement away from the lake, so you don't own property right to the lake itself.
Okay,
So,
that's interesting.
so in other words, they have control. Like if you want to put in a boat dock or a boat ramp or whatever, they have to approve
You
it.
have to get permits
Yeah,
from them.
yeah.
So,
So I guess it is for navigability.
well, I'm thinking, but the Tennessee River is navigable, and all those, and Fort Loudon Lake is a TVA lake, isn't it?
I think
I think
so.
it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a little bit of an aside and interesting bit of trivia, but we don't have the ability right now
Yeah.
to pull up. My only smart device is right there filming us,
Yeah.
so we can't look this up. Maybe if we level up this interview process at some point, I'll have a third person that I can holler at to find out answers for me. So I'm curious a little bit more about your father, because for me, when I think about, so I mentioned before that the goal of this project is to kind of talk about people being excellent and the excellence that we encounter in our life and the excellence that we personally live out. And being a police chief is a position of significant rank. It's, a position of status. I mean, I know that you're being humble and you're saying, hey, the town wasn't that big, but it's still significant.
Mhm.
And so I'm curious if you could speak more about your father, about your experience with your father. Do you have anything that, when you think about him or when you speak about him to others, is there anything that stands out in your mind?
Well, he was very kind, and he was very giving, and like he'd give anybody the shirt off his back or anything if they needed it. My mother said one time when they first got married that he went to the store to buy like a turkey or something or a ham or something, whatever they're having for Christmas or Thanksgiving, and this poor woman was in the store with her children and didn't have enough money to buy, like her canned food or whatever she was going to get. So everything he had bought for our Thanksgiving dinner, he gave to her. And then he didn't have any more money left, so we had to just come home.
I was about to ask, so
Yeah.
what did you do for your Thanksgiving dinner?
Well, I was a little baby, so I don't know. But my mother said they just had to eat whatever they had there at the house,
I see.
because he felt
So-
the need to give her the food that.
The significant detail here is he gave all of what he had in that moment. Not he had lots, so he gave some to her and then had some left over for himself, but he literally didn't have enough left over for himself. Is that what
No,
you're saying?
he gave her the best stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, he just kept. We just ate. Well, of course, I was a baby. I don't remember that, but she told me that. So. But he had a really hard childhood too. He grew up in Chicago, the streets of Chicago in the 1920s. Okay, when all the big criminals were on the streets like Dillinger and all of that. And his dad was really terrible to his mother, and actually his mother died when he was 7, and his father remarried and had some more children with this other woman, but his father would not bring the money home that he made, and so my dad went to work when he was 13, and he didn't get to finish school, high school or anything, and he went to work so he could buy food for his brothers and sisters and his stepmother, and that's the way he grew up. But then after he decided to become, and then World War II came, and of course he was in World War II, and then when he came out of that, he worked as a carpenter for a while because he could build anything. But then he wanted to be a policeman, so he went to Northwestern University in Chicago for schooling there, so he could become a policeman. So he did get some education, even though it was way after he was supposed to get it, because he was in his 30s, late 30s by then.
Well, that's very hip these days. Your father was a trendsetter before he even knew it. It's totally acceptable in 2021 for 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds and 60-year-olds and 80-year-olds to go back to school. Everybody is counseling everyone that it's never too late to make a change in their life, and I think that's I think that's good advice.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly had some lost 20s myself, and so.
But it's kind of ironic because some of his brothers were in the mafia, seriously, and after my dad became a policeman, they couldn't associate anymore because of that. And so, I can remember going to their house and having dinner and things like that with them. But after he became a policeman, they couldn't see each other anymore. Then I didn't see him again. Well, I saw him, of course, when my father died when they came to the funeral. But then maybe a year or two before that, they actually came to Tennessee to come and visit him. And one of his sisters did too, so they had to kind of separate from each other because of that. So he saw the bad side, he saw the shooting in the streets, in other words, because it's Chicago, and then I guess that's why he wanted to be a policeman. I don't know.
I think it's safe to say that, to emphasize you're talking about his kindness and his being a very giving person. He saw all these things that were the opposite of that, and instead of being brought down by those things, he sought out something that would allow him to champion the opposite. Certainly from the simple perspective that I'm getting right now, listening to this, not having known him, not having known the time, you have a choice, right? You encounter those things, and I guess you have 3 choices, right? You can become a part of it, you can try to ignore it, or you can act in opposition to these bad things, and it seems like he chose that third option. So,
and even like in the 60s when Castro was taking over Cuba, there was a lot of Cuban immigrants that were coming into our town, and I remember my mother and father both helping them, and other people in the town obviously helping these people find a place to get a job and live and everything like that. So they were both of them were always helping other people, They always thought about how the other people might need help.
How do you think that affected your decisions as far as, do you feel like the example that your parents set affected how you acted as you went through your own life?
I think so, because I realized if you really wanted anything, you had to do it yourself, People would help you, but you really had to do it yourself. So, in other words, you had to make sure you knew what you wanted and set your sights for what you wanted and work hard for what you wanted, and then eventually you would get it, because nothing was ever given to us that I can think of, and neither to either one of my parents either, because my mother had similar circumstances. She was raised by one of her aunts and uncles that really didn't want to raise her and her brothers and sisters, her 2 brothers and herself. So she always felt like she wasn't wanted, and which she wasn't really where she lived. But anyway, she was out on her own too, where she had to, she got her high school education, and she got a job as a telephone operator, and then after that's when she met my dad, and so she worked for everything she had too. So.
Well, so if I can summarize a few of the values that you have emphasized, I'm hearing the kindness and the giving of yourself. I'm hearing the, you mentioned your mother's exceptional memory. So we're looking at, awareness of your surroundings and the intelligence to commit things to memory and act upon them and then seek out challenging circumstances that even test and challenge your memory, such as, like you're saying, your mother working as the operator, which was, I have a very naive perspective on what that job looks like because I'm like, oh yeah, you just plug the thing into here. But what I'm hearing you say is you plug the thing into here as quickly as you can, which means you already know where it's going rather than
Yeah, it's like this
pulling
board.
up the book and being like, oh, where's
Yeah.
so and so. It's like, no,
this,
you have to know where
yeah,
it
this
is.
huge board full of holes.
Yeah.
And they don't change. So, like, if this is a grocery store up here and the doctor's office down there, as quick as you can remember
Right.
where stuff is, you can plug it in.
Right. And then the third thing that stands out, of course, is the hard work, right? So you have to know what you want and work hard for it and frankly stay focused on the goal. Yes.
Yes.
I don't know that you get to be a police chief or anything of merit without knowing what you want and focusing on it and staying focused even when it gets hard.
Well, I think one of the reasons my dad was probably a police chief, though, is because of his leadership skills. He just, some people are just natural leaders, and people want to follow people like that. So I don't think he set out to be the chief, in other words, but people saw qualities in him that they thought would be good to follow, in other words, and be a good leader. And
Well, I think that being kind and working hard are two really good qualities of leadership, right?
I think so too.
Well, so this brings me back to you and thinking about how before we started recording, you were kind of telling me, and I actually didn't know, and this is the cool thing for me, you have two separate bachelor's degrees and then a master's degree. And those are things that you only get through that focused, committed hard work, right? So can you speak a little bit to why you chose to do what you were doing as far as, so you went and you got a bachelor's degree in animal science first, correct?
Yes.
Why did you choose animal science?
Well, I wanted to be a veterinarian.
Okay.
But the curriculum for the chemistry was too difficult for me.
Okay.
And so I had to do a second option. So actually, I quit school for about 6 or 8 months, and my husband talked me into going back and finishing my degree. And anyway, so then when I finished that, I got a job at Tennessee Tech, and I was in a leadership position there as a supervisor, and I had to train people. And people kept telling me how great how great a teacher I was, and how I could, what I'm saying. I explained things, and they could quickly understand it.
So
and I didn't talk down to somebody when I was trying to explain it to them. I was trying to be respectful of them, is what I'm trying to say.
So they conned you into being a teacher.
No, I thought, well, if I'm a good teacher, maybe I ought to go into teaching. But I always liked helping people and helping people learn things, and I always liked high school age kids, because I like to be able to have a conversation like we're having right now, whereas with an elementary child, you really don't have over a 2.5 to 3 minute conversation with them, whereas a high school student is, they're trying to find their path in life, and lots of them have difficult situations they're in, and they need some guidance too.
Yeah, I can empathize with that. I know that I have considered teaching as, not actively right now by any means, but along the arc of my life when I'm thinking, what do I want to do with myself? Teaching has always been of interest. I've never taken significant action on it, but I agree with what you're saying about high school age kids, which are on the cusp of adulthood. Mentally, or intellectually, they're already capable. They probably lack some maturity, some life experience. They probably haven't failed or succeeded quite enough yet. And so you're saying, like, you can have good, meaningful conversations with them, conversations that you'll actually enjoy,
Yes.
where it's not just a one-way conversation where
Yes,
you're constantly
yeah.
speaking at them. You actually can speak to them and they speak back, but then they still need somebody who's prepared to have their back and support them in this transitional period of their life. Yeah.
Yes. I agree.
I can dig that as far as the value of high school students in particular versus younger aged kids.
And also, like I said, I did teach college for a while, and I enjoyed that very much. Um, I'm talking about like not high college, so things that I don't understand, like physics or something. But just the beginning college years, were so essentially just an old high school student, in other words. But again, they're still planning their futures, and so it was interesting to me, and it was very good for me. I really liked it.
Well, so let me ask you a question, and this can be, we've spoken about your father already and a little bit about this high school thing. I'm curious, as you have been in the many places that you've been in your life, were there any people in particular that you admired more than others? Maybe not celebrities or public figures that were famous, but people just in your life, whether they were coworkers or employers or friends or whoever.
I just think any people, no matter what country or state or whatever you go to, have an interesting set of circumstances and facts that they've grown up with, and they've contributed to society, and they can share with you, and there's a lot to every person that you meet that you really don't realize until you actually have a conversation with them and sit down and talk to them.
Well, you just gave the new synopsis. I'm going to start using that statement for the intro for my interviews,
Okay.
because that's 100% the goal. That's why we're doing this, right? Is to show that, because I agree with you.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with you, but it's something that I think we need to show people, right? I think that in the world we live in right now, we have an opportunity to give examples of exactly what you're saying, rather than treating everyone like a stranger or treating everyone like we already know, who and what they are. As a quick aside, we watch the news and we see all this polarization in the news, and we see all this prejudgment of people, right? People who don't believe the same way or didn't vote the same way as us, or don't watch. I mean, these days it's like literally you don't watch the same news sources, so you don't have the same information, and so we make all these assumptions about each other. But I will tell you some things. So my wife Anne, Michelle's daughter, and I were talking about this process yesterday. We were kind of on the drive over here to Cookville, looking at my notes and trying to come up with a format. And one of the things that I realized is inevitably going to happen as I do enough of these interviews is at some point I'm going to find at least two people who have competing and antagonistic visions of what it is to be good and to be excellent. Because they're going to have, so I believe that excellence uh, is underpinned, your vision, your definition of excellence is underpinned by your values. So whatever your values are is going to inform what you believe to be excellent, because frankly, in my mind, a simple definition of excellence is you have a set of values, and excellence is the living of your values in the best way possible that's the most true to your values, right?
Yeah.
So it'd be very curious then to see what does it look like when we have a person whose values are this, and thus their vision of excellence is this, versus this person whose values are this, and they have opposite visions of what is excellent. Like where this one person says, I believe it's excellent to do this, and the other person says, I believe it's excellent to be the opposite of that. Not knowing each other.
Mm-hmm.
So then my long-term hope is that if I encounter that, and I expect I will, I want to figure out how do you reconcile that? How do you bring those two people together in a sit down like this and just have a conversation and say, is there common ground to be found? Because you're saying, what kind of keyed me into this is you're saying that no matter what culture they're from or where they are, they have interesting things to say and do. There's value to them, right? You're saying basically you admire people for their own sake. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I hear in your answer to my question. Because I asked you, who do you admire? And you said, well, I admire everyone. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of just, it's an interesting challenge then. How do we admire everyone in a world where everybody is being pitted against each other? Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you have any advice, having been through, having met more people
I'm a little older than you.
Exactly.
And so when I was younger, especially when I worked for the development district, and I had to travel to 14 counties in the Upper Cumberland area, which are all very, very Appalachian, poverty, poor, rural areas. And I was, you meet a mayor or a county executive or something, and you're under the assumption when you go to a county like that this person's not going to be very educated, and it's just some, not that there's anything wrong with farmers, but it's just some farmer or something that just got elected and he's going to do this part time. And so it's kind of eye opening for me when I go visit these men and women, that because I was bringing like programs that they could sign up for their city or community to get like sidewalks put in or sewers put in or lighting for a ball field or something like that, because they had to put matching money with the government money to do whatever they wanted. And you'd go in their office and they'd have all these diplomas on the wall, like where they got their master's degree or whatever.
Right.
And that the first time I saw that, I thought, I've been judging these people wrong. I've already had this preconceived definition of what I think these people in these rural counties are. And they're educated too, but they want to stay in their rural counties. They don't want to go to New York City, and they want to help the county that they're in. So there really are, it doesn't matter how much education you have, I'm trying to say, but it's how you put it to use. And what, like everybody